Good evening, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. I hope you've enjoyed the evening and the conversation so far. It's really great to see so many friends in the room, as well as many new faces. Thank you for joining us to celebrate International Women's Day. I think it's important that we take this moment to reflect on all of the women, all of the human rights defenders who have been working for equality over many years, as well as the work that remains to be done. And what an amazing space this is for an event like this. And what a spectacular view we have of the City of Toronto here at the TD Centre. It's a great place for an event, but I also can't think of a better place to be celebrating International Women's Day and talking about women's rights than the boardroom of Canada's leading bank. I think hopefully in the future when we come, we'll see more pictures of women on the walls as as presidents of the bank. There's still some work to be done. Maybe Valerie. My name is Ian Hamilton, and I'm the Executive Director of Equitas, as well as the MC for tonight. And as we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto remains the home to many Indigenous peoples, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to gather here and celebrate the importance of women's rights. As you will see from the program, we have a few introductory remarks before the main event. I, for one, am really looking forward to the conversation between Lloyd Robertson and Nderitu. And if the speed at which the event sold out is any indication, I think everyone in the room is as well. Inequality, sexual violence and harassment, and the exclusion of women from leadership positions are some of the critical issues that confront all of us today. As we mark the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights this year, we have no excuses for not doing a better job at making gender equality a reality. It is my hope that we'll leave tonight inspired and motivated by the conversation to rededicate ourselves to being part of the change we want to see in our communities and in the world. So tonight's event would not be possible without our financial sponsors and partners. I want to begin by thanking our host, TD Bank Group, for their long support of this annual event in Toronto, but also for their support for our programs for children across Canada. TD is represented tonight by Valerie Pichet, and I'm delighted that she'll be sharing a few words with us shortly. We also want to thank our other sponsors and partners, Huawei, represented here by Rocco Lalonde, Fortigo, represented by Kirk Dixon, Telesat, and Simon Fraser University's Morris J. Wosk Center for Dialogue, represented by Grace Lee. Our volunteer board members are a constant source of support and have been instrumental in helping us to make tonight's event successful. I would like to ask them to stand as I name the board members present so you can know who they are. So please join me in thanking and welcoming André Beaulieu, David Chemla, and Aaron Aylward. Similarly, I want to thank the staff who are present from Equitas, Brigitte Malenfant, Sausan Kanouche, Annie Billington, Julie Contam King, and Ruth Morrison. This is real teamwork, and without all the efforts of everyone, we wouldn't have been able to celebrate with you tonight. And if you haven't met the Equitas team, I hope you have some time to speak with them before you leave, because they can help answer any questions you might have about Equitas or our programs. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Valerie Pichet, who will say a few words of welcome on behalf of TD Bank. She is Associate Vice President, Community Relations at the bank. She's a wonderful partner and a strong supporter of the work that Equitas and many others are doing to advance equality, diversity, inclusion in communities across the country. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Pichet.
Good evening. Thank you for the kind words, Ian. I appreciate the introduction. On behalf of my colleagues here at TD, I'd like to extend a very welcome to all of you joining us here on the 54th floor of the TD Tower this evening. Last year, we actually celebrated the 50th anniversary of this tower. Folks thought we had Canada's anniversary wrong because we had a big 50 in 2017 in front of the towers, and everyone thought someone probably got fired over that. But it was to recognize the remarkable architecture that is this building that we're in right now. I want to echo Ian's recognition as well of the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Aboriginal territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, on whose territory we are this evening. But we're delighted to have you here to celebrate human rights achievements, and in particular, those of Alice and Nderitu. Alice's tireless work to promote peace in Africa and protect the human rights of all human beings, and especially women, is truly remarkable. Alice, you are a trailblazer, and it seems more than appropriate that we honor you tonight on International Women's Day 2018. I look forward to hearing your story and learning more about your important, impressive, and inspiring work later this evening. So I realize I stand between you and those stories, so I'm going to make it quick. On behalf of TD, we're so pleased to have offered this space to host the occasion. For those of you who don't know, this building was designed by renowned modernist architect Mies van der Rohe. The TD Center complex, and in this room in particular, has hosted U.S. presidents, royal family members, international heads of state, sports and music celebrities, and captains of industry. But interesting little fact, as we are International Women's Day today, is that we only got a women's washroom on this floor in 1998. But the progress we have made, and I promised my friend Graham back here, who is helping to host us this evening, is that we're also proud to say that we are almost at 50% on our board here at TD Bank. So we're making progress. We're getting there. So it's fitting, though, that when we gather to celebrate prominent individuals and their incredible achievements like we are this evening, that we get to do it right here at TD. I would also like to thank Equitas for the ongoing and laborious work that they have undertaken to advance human rights education here in Canada and around the world. The scope of their work seems boundless, their achievements vitally important, and their efforts deserve strong recognition and funding support. So TD has been proud to support Equitas in their mission by being a lead partner in Equitas's Play It Fair program. This is an 11-year-old initiative promoting human rights, non-discrimination, and peaceful conflict resolution in a fun yet informative format at day camps, youth camps, and after-school programs, reaching tens of thousands of children right across Canada every year. The progressive program reinforces human rights values and helps children learn how they can contribute to a more vibrant, diverse, and inclusive community. This is in line with our commitment to provide the ability for everyone to have the opportunity to succeed and participate fully in what the future has to offer. We want to help build an inclusive future, and we want to help people have confidence in achieving their own goals. As you may know, the 2018 international theme for Women's Day is Press for Progress, so don't forget the hashtag if you're posting anything on social media. With so much already accomplished, there has never been a more important time to stay motivated and act on this strong call to action. While constant progress is what we strive for at TD, we must all continue our hard work to motivate everyone to think, act, and be gender inclusive within our workplaces, in our everyday lives, and all around the world. For tonight, like you, I look forward to the thought-provoking insights that our honored guest Alice will provide us. But do also take a moment to savor the sights from the 54th floor and know that by working together, we're making our communities a better place through our collaborative support for wonderful institutions like Equitas. Thank you and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Valerie, for those words of welcome Thank you again for hosting us, and thank you, of course, for the continued support of TD and for our Play It Fair program. It's now my real pleasure to introduce Julie Concam-King, who is Equitas's Associate Director of Programs, to say a few words. Please join me in welcoming Julie.
Good evening. So it's my great pleasure this evening to welcome you to this event with this beautiful view that has been generously donated by our longstanding partner TD. And we wanted to in particular thank Val Pichet and her amazing team that has helped us to make this event possible. We'd also really like to take a moment to thank all of you for taking the time and making the time to come and join us on International Women's Day. Together with us, you're marking the contributions of women and young girls, not just here in Canada, but internationally, and the importance of gender equality and women's rights as human rights. On this day, we recognize the challenges that still do exist, whether that be for our partners internationally who are working on gender-based violence issues, whether that be for women closer to home who are working on workplace harassment and discrimination issues, whether that be other partners of ours who are fighting for justice for those who are missing, murdered, or have disappeared. At Equitas, we have been working with women, girls, young boys, men, members of the LGBTQI community for over 5 decades. And during that time, we've been using human rights education to look at and address deep-seated behaviors to change practice and to advocate for human rights education and gender equality in the everyday. We've also been collaborating with the federal government, particularly as they breathe life into the new feminist international assistance policy. And we've been collaborating with corporations in the private sector as they are looking to advance the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular number 5. In my work across Canada and here in Toronto, I've been inspired by the resilience I'm seeing in the young women who participate in our programs. Whether that be young Indigenous women in Winnipeg who are looking at destigmatizing discussions around mental health, whether that be young women in Montreal who are raising awareness about gender stereotypes and sexual exploitation, whether that be here in Toronto, where newcomers and refugees are advocating for their voices both to exist and be heard. I wanted to take a moment to share a few words with you from a young Haitian woman who participates in one of our programs. She started with us when she was 11 years old. She's since then gone on to engage with decision makers. She's also co-presented with us at a number of international forums, most recently at the Metropolis Forum for Mayors, and also at the World Social Forum. When I asked her what she sees as her role in communities, this is what she said to me. For me, being a young leader means that you've noticed that something is wrong in your city or your neighborhood, and you have been involved in making change. There are injustices that affect me and that I want to fight. You are never too young to make a difference. The most important thing I have learned is to have our voices be heard. I recently asked Yuvelin what's next. She didn't miss a beat. She looked me in the eye and she said, Prime Minister. I want to thank you for joining us in this movement to ensure that every girl, every young woman has an equal opportunity to participate and can envision a future without limits.
Thank you, Julie. Before the main event, just to pick up on what Val was saying about social media, we are tweeting about this event. So if you are so inclined, definitely use the hashtag Press for Progress. We also encourage you to use hashtag IWD2018 and hashtag Equality Matters. And you can look for our tweets at Equitas International. We're also filming tonight's event. We do want to make it available to others who can't be in the room with us this evening. If anybody is concerned about appearing on the video or uncomfortable with that, please let us know and we'll make sure that you're not included in the video. The beauty of editing these days, right? So now for the main event. And it's my great pleasure now to have the opportunity to introduce our guest of honor and, of course, our well-renowned moderator. Starting with Alice Nderitu. As a young child, Alice was told that women could not participate in the work of peacemaking. Today, she is living proof that women can not only partake in mediation and conflict prevention, but that they must have a voice at the table if communities want to achieve lasting peace. I first met Alice in 2005 when she attended our annual International Human Rights Training Program in Montreal, and got to know her even better when she returned 2 years later as one of the facilitation team. Since then, she's been an active member of our alumni network, and she's been participating in and advising on many of our activities in East Africa. Alice currently works as an advisor to the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue and a mediator of armed conflicts. She has led mediation processes that have ensured that women had a voice in successful peace agreements in Kenya and in Nigeria. And if you have any idea of what goes on in those countries, you can imagine what the challenges are in that. She is also the only female member of a group of African elders conducting mediation between African leaders at the highest levels. This has also been a busy time for Alice. She received the Global Pluralism Award in November, and she is in Canada now as a recipient of the 2017-2018 Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue, presented by Simon Fraser University's Center for Dialogue. We are very fortunate to have her with us and have such an accomplished guest to be sharing her experiences. Thank you, Alice, for making the effort to be here with us tonight and for sharing your stories. We are also thrilled that Lloyd Robertson has agreed to join us again to lead our conversation. As someone who has spent so much time in our homes, on our televisions, he should need no introduction, but I will try. Lloyd Robertson is one of the most accomplished journalists in North America. He has guided Canadians through some of the most significant events in our recent history, covering and helping us understand the implications of elections, referenda, wars, tragedies, as well as celebrations. While he has stepped down as host and chief correspondent for CTV's investigative news series W5, he remains a special correspondent for CTV and one of the most trusted faces in television news. Many of us know him best for his 35 years as chief anchor and senior editor of the country's most watched national newscast, CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson. But I also understand he had a successful career with some other network beforehand. And it should come as no surprise that the high quality of his journalism has been recognized through numerous awards throughout his career. Tonight, Mr. Robertson is very generously participating in his third event with Equitas, and we truly appreciate his participation and hope that he doesn't mind if we now consider him one of our honorary alumni. So please join me in welcoming Alice Nderitu and Lloyd Robertson.
I think, Alice, I'd like to start right there with your story, your personal journey from the beginning, how you got into this. What was the spark that said to you when you were just very young, this is what I want to do, this drives me, this betterment of human beings and women's situations in Africa? What was it?
Thank you very much, and it's such a great honor to be here, to be interviewed by you, to be in conversation with you, and thank you for everybody who left whatever else they were doing to be here this evening. I am not so young. I turned 50 this year, and to be half a century old is of course, a great honor, but...
Try a century and a bit.
And when I was young, when I was very young, I remember, I think I was about 8 or 9. I don't remember how old I was, but it was my birthday, I remember, when my eldest brother told me that he would take me somewhere and I should never tell anyone that he had taken me there. And I said, okay, fine. So where he took me was, we climbed a tree, And soon the elders came and they put their stools round the tree, and then they began adjudicating cases. So people would come, and then they would their cases would be heard, the kind of issues they mostly it was what they'd done. And then at the end of it all, then one elder would raise his stick up and hit the ground and shout Kihoto, which means justice. And then that meant that was the end of the case. So I was very fascinated. And first, I couldn't tell anyone, so which was, it weighed heavily on me because I wanted to discuss it with my mother and father and everyone, but my brother told me, you must not ever tell anyone that we've been up the tree. But it struck me as very, very powerful because the people who appeared before the elders, they were, in many instances, people we considered powerful. Our teacher showed up one day, I remember, and he had to answer on why he had beaten up his wife. Like, it was powerful, yes. It was really powerful. So seeing people deliberating around an issue and thinking that we can get a solution, and that solution is accepted by those appearing before them, was very powerful for me. So of course it was alternative dispute resolution in a traditional aspect. And the more I told my brother that one day I was going to sit in that group, the more he told me, you cannot, you're a girl, you can't. And we had that discussion for a long time. We still have it, even now. Yeah.
Siblings.
Yes. He still doesn't believe that I'm there, that I'm doing this. And so somehow at the back of my mind, I knew that I always wanted to be involved in something that involved a dialogue and a solution, and people really discussing the merits or demerits of an issue. But then I went on to do so many other things in life. I worked as a journalist. I did a lot of things in life. But finally, I ended up working in the human rights world. And it was important for me to work for human rights because I also grew up in an era, like in the 80s and 70s and 90s, when there was a lot of fear in Kenya, when people would be arrested and detained without trial, and when human rights became associated with fighting against, like especially the police. And for me, it became important that I get involved somehow. So I got into the Human Rights Commission. And it was while I was working at the Human Rights Commission that I came to Equitas for the training. And now the beauty of the training of Equitas, the key thing that I took away from the training of Equitas was that you are encouraged, first you are invited as people from different countries. So the group that you stay in for 3 weeks, nobody's from your country, so you get to learn a lot about other people's countries, and you also are encouraged to be vulnerable. There was a lot of crying. We used to cry and talk about the human rights situations in our countries and what we are doing about them, and then you move towards a solution together, and then there is an individual plan that you actually have to implement yourself. But all that, what really I took away was the fact that I learned how to not only give my experience, but give the interpretation of my experience. And that works really well for me as I mediate, because now, as we speak, I'm a mediator of armed conflict. What that means is that I mediate conflict between armed groups. And when they come and we begin speaking about, I encourage them to talk about, to interpret their experiences. Their experiences are things that I'll probably have had before, like, because they'll usually start with general experiences. But when they begin to interpret what those experiences meant to them, then we're able to get to the core of the issue.
But getting there, getting these people to the table, you must have faced some resistance in getting these people together, and also purely in some cases because you're a woman and the men didn't want you to get involved in this. Is that fair to say?
Yes, to be involved as a woman mediating armed conflict, it's usually required that you must hold another position that then gives you status in the room. And for me, in Kenya, I've been a commissioner. I was a commissioner, and that helped to give me that kind of status in the room. By the time I got to Nigeria, I had mediated in Kenya, I had mediated in Somalia, in South Sudan. So at least I had a good bio that spoke about the kind of work that I had done. But it still doesn't make it easy. And my boss tells me that I should write a book called Tea Diplomacy. Yes, because I always show up with tea from Kenya. You know, Kenya is a tea growing country. So the first meeting that I usually, I work with a team of Nigerian advisors, and we usually, we'll map the conflict and analyze the conflict, and we will be looking at it in terms of what we call, is it ripe, like in terms of intervention. And for me, as a person, I like to go to places where the conflict keeps recycling, keeps coming back, because I feel there's a lot of power in interrupting a circle of conflict, and then people understand that we didn't fight this particular year, and then we do it again the following year, and then soon we develop a culture of peace. But anyway, getting back to your question, when I get into the communities, first of all, I'll hand over the tea and I say, I come from Kenya and I brought you a gift, and here is some tea from Kenya, and I'll explain how it's grown. And then they will have been told. So like usually the first point of entry is usually the chief, very powerful. And the chiefs in Nigeria are powerful. People kneel in front of chiefs, it's really powerful. And they will be expecting me to talk about the conflict, to say I have come to try and sort out the conflict and the violence that's been happening here. I don't mention that at all. I talk about the tea, and go on and on about the tea, and we talk about Kenya, and I talk about what I like about Nigeria, the tradition, those kind of things. And then I then ask for an appointment to come back and see the chief again, and an appointment like the following week, and he'll say yes.
So you meet them individually first?
Yes, individually. And then now I go back again, and then now we discuss, and I say, this has been going on for long, and by which time I have compiled a list of the disadvantages of the conflict. And I've also mapped out, I have a whole list of the peace dividends. If you have peace.
Peace dividends.
Yes, this will work out right for you, this will work out right for you. And really you can't have people going on and on discussing peace when they could be discussing other issues. And then we agree. But first, the key thing is that I have a relationship. For me, relationships are so important. I try as hard as possible to create a relationship, to find commonalities, which is another part of the Equitas training, finding commonalities in terms of what is it that brings us together, what is it that we have in common that we can discuss. And it's usually very interesting conversations. So by the time we get to that level, then I ask the chief, can you give us 6 people to discuss this particular issue? And if he says, I don't want this discussed, I say, thank you, we will not discuss. You don't want us to discuss land, we will not discuss land. But we'll talk about the river, we'll talk about access to resources, we'll talk about, everything else. And then the 6 people, usually I will ask for a cultural development leader who is also the contact with the business community. I will ask for a religious leader, because mostly there's so many religious connotations in the violence. And then I will ask for a youth leader. And then I will sneak in a woman leader at that point. Oh yes, you have to, because it's often said that war making is men's business.
Yes.
And therefore peacemaking has to be men's business as well. And then I'll ask for a youth leader, and then there's always somebody who hangs around the chief or around the community who doesn't quite fit all those positions, so I'll ask for a respected opinion leader, and then that person then comes in. So now we get a structure that has a woman in there.
So just so we understand that, then you actually try to pick out people from within the individual communities who are seen as, if not leaders, thoughtful, wise, people who can engage in a diplomatic way with the problem.
Oh yes, we try to, like the chief has a lot of leeway in terms of, because it has to be owned by the community, so the chief and the elders have a lot of leeway in terms of who they send to the process, but we advise. We will say, you know, we need the following. So like, for example, in the earlier mediations that I conducted, I used to get women, because they haven't had women doing this before. And you know, in areas where violence has been so recurrent, you actually find that some people are professional dialogue experts in conflict. They've discussed it, and they'll all be men. And so when when they put in a woman, in most cases, to just be like tokenism, like to just be, oh, you wanted a woman, here she is. So then she comes in, and she's timid. She doesn't know how to discuss this. She wasn't there when the war was being planned. So now they're discussing how to get peace, and she is talking about herself in her individual capacity. And you know, in most cases, they will tell you, like in many parts of Africa and in many parts of the world, that a woman speaks for herself, but a man speaks for young people, he speaks for women, he speaks for himself, and he speaks for the ethnic community. So she'll be there completely feeling like she should be out of the room, and I have to spend a lot of time at lunchtime and at break time, like speaking to her and telling her, you could phrase issues this way, and organizing separate workshops for the women negotiators. And it got to a point where that was taking so much away from me, because I'm a mediator, and being a mediator sitting at the front, it's such hard work, because I'm a woman and I have to consider a lot of things, including what to wear. And I don't want to. Yes, I always say that I want people to remember what I said, not what I was wearing. So I conform. I dress if the way people dress. So like if I go to Somalia, full niqab, I don't even think about it twice, and I don't even think about issues of whether people will think that I am like I'm feeling that I shouldn't do that. But anyway, that's how I dress. So anyway, the woman, the women, it got to a point where I felt, no, I can't keep going on like this. Now I put in a condition, like when we're getting a woman, we usually say, now we want a woman who is a professional, but who lives in the community. So we get teachers, we get nurses, we get livestock development officers, women who are already in positions where when they speak with authority, and when they speak, the community listens. It may not be in the space of peace, but in spaces elsewhere. And like, for example, one nurse told me.
You're dealing here with societies that have seen male hierarchies for centuries.
Yes.
So you're making this sound as though you're doing it pretty easily, but it's had to be tough, right? It's had to be tough.
It's tough, and it takes months. Even the preparatory stage, getting those 6 people and getting them to actually in dialogue, to get into a room to begin the dialogue.
What's your secret? What's your secret?
The secret, the tea to begin with.
Remember that, everybody. The tea.
And then I am considered non-threatening in the sense that the communities are at war, but I'm able to get into the communities. I speak to the women. I go to, and I don't discriminate, I go to mosques, I go to churches, I speak to women, I speak to men. I spend a lot of time understanding the conflict. By the time I begin to mediate any violent conflict, I have read up so much on it. Anything that has been written on it, I will have looked for and read it. I will have spoken to as many people as possible. I will have spoken to those who tried to solve it in the past, so that by the time I sit there and they say, anybody says anything, then I know what they are talking about. And then my mind, I keep it open like a slate, like a clean slate in terms of getting in new information. And I try as much as possible to listen. I listen a lot. I always say that my first rule is to have a really small mouth and really big ears. And so I sit there and absorb like a sponge, getting all this information, so that then when I begin to respond back to the communities, first I make sure that everything that has been said in the room, I'm able to pick out particular phrases and respond to that. I make sure that they feel that somebody is listening and somebody is doing something with what they've said.
Is there a resolution to that kind of thing in the future, in terms of bringing some of these people into the mainstream so they don't break away like that?
Yes, there is, and that's what we do. Our peace agreements are structured in such a way that first we identify the root causes of issues as human rights violations. And many people confuse the manifestations of violent conflict as root causes, but usually they're not. And when we get to identifying the root cause of the conflict, then we are able to then work around programs that bring those kind of, like the youth, into spaces where they can be heard. Because sometimes it's usually not too much even about poverty and all that, although it's a factor. But exclusion is a really, really key, important component in getting people into spaces where they feel wanted and where they feel that if they get into violence, that then they will lose something. Mm-hmm.
How do you get past what is clearly vengeful activity, violence, people feeling that they will never associate or talk to this person or that group again?
It's usually so difficult. You know, like the sessions that we have, the dialogue sessions, we have people who have, many people say we've not been, like we haven't spoken about the, our personal experiences. We haven't interpreted our personal experiences. We haven't brought them out. We keep speaking about the ethnic community. And it gets difficult when people speak like that. I remember one day I was mediating violence in southern Kaduna in Nigeria. And we had this young man, he was a doctor, I remember. And he stood up and he said, you know, we keep talking and talking and talking, and you need to understand that I sit here knowing that I'll never agree to what you are saying. Then he told me, you know something? I lost 17 members of my community. And I lost them in one day. And they were specifically targeted because they were professionals. And I am not going to accept whatever you say. So you keep talking, but we've heard all this before. And he said there have been 26 previous attempts to solve this violence here. There have been commissions of inquiry. You're not going to take me anywhere. So then, and he got very emotional. And then I asked the room, I said, could we break for lunch? Because I wanted to have some space with the young man. Yes, for tea. And then they said no. The rest of them, they said no, and they all sat there. And I said, no, we need a break. We need to discuss with this young man. And they said, no, it's not lunchtime yet. And I said, okay. And you know, at the back of my mind, I was saying to myself, this is really it, you know? This is when I make the decision in terms of how to move on. So I said, okay, then let's talk about these particular issues. And then one old man stood up and I said, no, because this young man said, I want the space to talk. And I said, okay, speak. And then one old man stood up and I told him, you know, sir, please, Baba, sit down until we hear him. And then this old man said, no, I wanted to tell him that I know he's talking about my ethnic community, attacking his ethnic community. And I also want him to know that I also lost 5 people from my ethnic community, my wife, my 2 sons, my daughter, and my daughter-in-law. And they were killed in these fights that we have between our ethnic communities. And he gave me the perfect entry point in terms of, okay, so both sides have lost. So for how long will we go on like this? And it became a very useful conversation. But it's usually very, 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 very difficult. When I sit there, I have to sit there and be there 100%. I don't touch my cell phone sometimes for weeks. It frustrates my family. But but I have to be there. I sit in the room and I have to be there 100% because I have to keep observing everything in the room. I have to look at who is not talking to who or who is talking to who, how everything is going. You know, like there's so much that I can't describe right now in terms of the challenges of what we do. But important, very important to point out that in much of the work I've done in my own country, Kenya, and in Nigeria, in South Sudan, in so many of these countries that I've worked in, important to point out that the rule of law is usually there's been some aspects of the rule of law having broken down, criminal justice agencies not doing what they're supposed to do, so that because in an ideal situation, if somebody kills another person, then they should go to the police station and the police will sort that out. But then when we have violence, like we had in Kenya in 2008, then that option is not even viable. You don't even think about it. So it means that the rule of law is absent, and we wouldn't need peace agreements if the rule of law was working. Mm-hmm.
In a few minutes, we're going to go to questions from the audience, but I just wanted to touch two other things and to make this point from you, get this point clearly from you. Mm-hmm. What special elements do women bring to the human rights and the whole peace process?
Mm-hmm.
Unique.
For human rights, we usually say that if you see a demonstration and there are women in it, that really is a demonstration. That those are serious issues. But in terms of human rights and peace building, areas in which women have traditionally not been seen to be in, the fact that women are there as in the demonstrations, for example, it gives legitimacy. You know that this is legitimate. There's something here. There's something going on here. And the fact that women, of course, form 50% of the world's population, and in many places where I work, women again form another huge percentage of the poor. 70% of the poor are usually women, and violent conflict affects the poor more than anyone else. The rich can run off somewhere, but the poor have to stay right there and cope with it. So if then women get involved, then it gives everything sustainability, because then they want to implement. So, if you study peace agreements, all these peace agreements that have been signed by men sitting in a room alone, and then they go out and then they want other people to implement, they will fail because then there's no ownership. So they give that sustainability as well. And then you won't believe the kind of issues that women bring to the table, how women widen the set of agendas at a table. And usually I like to ask people, what does peace look like to you? I ask the women, I ask the men. The men talk about, I say, what does peace look like to you? And they say, peace looks like when our businesses can stay open, when I can go to the bank and it's open, when I can transact, and not be worried about whether I'll find violence outside. When the transport system is working, like I can get out and get into my car and drive off, or I can get into a bus and get somewhere. And then I ask women, what does peace look like to you? And women say, for me, peace is when schools are open and I can get the children out of the house and into school, and I don't have to sit with them all day explaining why people are fighting outside. And it means when markets are open and I can go to the market and buy whatever I'm buying and catch up with whatever is going on in the community and listen to other people speaking. And it means when I go to the hospital and I'm not told in the hospital, there's no medicine because of the violence, youths have blocked the road. That's what peace means. So you can imagine when now we sit at a table and then able to identify those as human rights issues, like the basics of food and health and issues to do with shelter. I'm able to bring them all out there and trace them, for example, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then people see that, and also trace them to other conflicts in the world, and people then begin to see, you mean this is not just about us, the rest of the world has this kind of issues, so then we're able to move to a level of understanding because the agendas have been widened. So women bring so much to the table, and then of course women play a very huge role in nurturing young people, bringing up youth in societies where you find that there is a very big role of youth in violence. You'll find that women sometimes play a very big role in making the youth believe that they should be warriors, and women at the same time play a very big role in dismantling that kind of behavior.
That's a wonderful answer. Isn't that great? The two genders, the unique perspective each brings, and how it brings everybody together. Just very briefly, before we go to the audience, your connection to Equitas, just what has this meant to you?
It's meant a lot because Equitas I first came to Canada in 2005, as Ian said, and Equitas, that team of people that I described, the 15 people, we are still in touch today since 2005. And once in a while, we are Facebook friends. Once in a while, one of us will put out this photo of us singing, or in Equitas. And the same for the group that I co-facilitated. We are still friends. When I go to their countries, like I went to the Philippines to go work on the conflict in Cotabato, and one of my colleagues, one of the people in my team, actually wrote a column about me. He's a newspaper columnist in the Philippines. He said there's a Kenyan coming here to sort out these issues. So Equitas this long relationship, and then after that they came to Kenya. We had a TOT, a training of trainers in Uganda. Then after that we began training other people, and then Equitas has this beautiful manual that's very, like, we would follow it day by day in terms of all of us had the same manual, and then at the end of the workshop, of course, you'll have gone through the entire manual, and it made me write a similar manual on ethnic for teachers in Kenya to help them deal with the issues of stereotypes in class. Actually, to answer a question that a teacher asked me, she told me, all this work you keep doing with teachers, can you just tell me, if I spot a 10-year-old boy who is going to be xenophobic, I can already see the way he's behaving and he's saying all these hateful things, how do I stop him from becoming So then I wrote this manual, and then it got into Kenya's curriculum for teachers. It's now in Kenya's curriculum for teachers. It's the only one that deals with the ethnic divide. And if you read it, you'll see it's very, very clear that the ideas came from the Equitas manual. But my connection with Canada, of course, grew when I was invited here in November when I got the Global Pluralism Award. Very humbling, extremely humbling. And that to even be noticed that I was doing something unique. From the Global Pluralism Center and the Aga Khan and the Chief Justice of Canada were there. And then I had then proceeded to Simon Fraser University, that was 3 weeks ago, and got this other award. And for them, the other award is a Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue. And in terms of, because their slogan is engaging the world, so they said I was engaging the world. But very important to point out that I was nominated for the Global Pluralism Award by a lady I work with in Kenya. Her name is Meredith Preston McGee, and she is the African director for the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. She's Canadian. And then I was nominated again by Jacqueline O'Neill. She works in the US for an organization called Inclusive Security. It works for women's issues. Again, she's Canadian. And then very coincidental, these Canadians in my life. And then for the Simon Fraser Award, that one was a mystery because I did not know about it. It just appeared in my mailbox. So I kept, and they wouldn't tell me who had nominated me. I really tried to investigate. So finally they told me, and it was the High Commissioner for Canada in Kenya.
Oh.
Her name is Sarah Radeke. I had never met her before. So when we finally met, I asked her, why me? And then she said, because you're you. And it was such a moment. I mean, I didn't even know her. So then I arrived here in Canada, and then the chair of the jury of the Global Pluralism Award was the former Prime Minister, Joe Clark, Mr. Joe Clark, who immediately adopted me, took me in hand and told me, you're doing such a great job, and introduced me to so many people and invited me to his home, and I went for dinner, and it was so overwhelming. And he even came to Vancouver for the award 3 weeks ago. He came to be there. Yeah, so that's
Right.
my great connection
That's
with
wonderful.
Canada.
That lifts sort of the human sort of the kind of, for the person on the street, busy, 8 to 12 hours a day, lifts it out of the amorphous and into the practical when you talk about the Equitas manual and all of that. All right, everybody, we're going to open now for questions. Which
I thought you wanted.
you, I'm sorry, you're just heading out for a minute. Who's here to ask your question?
Sir, let me try one. And apologies if it's a bit of a non sequitur, but my question is about the role of local media and getting the message out in terms of the issues we've discussed. And I'm afraid I don't know much about local media in Africa, but I do know, as Lloyd, you would know, in Canada, the state of local media is not very strong. We've seen closures in newspapers. We've seen the prospects of local television stations closing and whatnot. So I just wonder if you have any views on the relevance of local media in terms of ensuring the public is aware of these issues.
Local media has its advantages and disadvantages. It has been used to fuel violence, as happened in the case of the Rwandan genocide. And but one of the things that I've learned in my work in peace building and mediating is to use the same methods used to promote violence to promote peace, because people who promote violence are usually very efficient, and they spend long amounts of time planning for violence, so then they know what to do. So I use local media a lot, especially local media that speaks in vernacular languages. And our team, I work with a really strong team of Nigerian advisors. And in Kenya as well, we work with local media. And one of the most powerful things I have found is that as soon as we get people to agree, identifying people who've been at war for years or who've been in open disagreement for years or decades, and getting them to go to a vernacular radio station or a local TV station and speaking together. And usually they've often said that it's usually the hardest thing they have to do. Like appear in public together and speak to people together, it's very, 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 very difficult. And local media gets that out a lot. Social media is quickly overtaking radio and local media in terms of, we have a lot of cell phones, especially in Kenya, because we use the cell phones a lot for our currency. We have something called M-Pesa, and it's that's how we use the phone to transact almost everything, to pay our bills, to pay like almost everything. So a lot of people have the phone, and with the phone comes social media, and social media has been terrible in terms of making the violence worse, pouring petrol onto the fire, and we have had to identify those who post those kind of things, and finding them and working with them, getting them into our programs, and getting them to turn around so that then they begin to post, if not peace, at least to stop posting those kind of issues or to post something balanced. So like in both Kenya and Nigeria, we have a very strong network of journalists who work in the areas with the areas that have violence, and there are a very strong mentorship program from journalists from both countries and Ghana as well, to help them write balanced stories and to help them put out those stories often. We have people who've been training people in those areas, in those areas, those violent areas, to write blogs and to write balanced blogs, to write blogs that can get attention of policymakers, to write blogs that get somewhere. We keep telling them, usually when you take a road, you want it to take you somewhere. Write a blog that will take people somewhere, and that somewhere needs to be somewhere useful, not more violence. So that usually helps. Mm-hmm.
We have this wonderful organization in Canada called Canadian Journalists for Free Expression. Mm-hmm. Are journalists operating safely throughout the continent of Africa in most cases, from what you can see?
Oh no, they're not. You know, by virtue of the things that they write, they're usually at risk, at great risk. So you'll find in quite a number of cases, like journalists will get arrested. They will.
We've heard a lot about that.
Yes, yeah. So they're usually at risk. So they have to maintain, of course, their journalistic integrity, but at the same time they have to be careful. Always my advice to people who work in the human rights world and journalists and all of us who work in areas where there's so much danger is take care of yourself. You'll not be useful to us dead. So take care of yourself, and you can expose yourself, but find ways to protect yourself. You can expose an issue, but find ways to protect yourself. It's not as easy as I'm making it sound. And however often I say it, they usually don't. Like when people really want to get something out, then personal safety is usually not something they're thinking about. But I often say it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, over here. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier, you alluded, Mr. Robertson, to the fact that we in the West don't generally sort of focus on Africa as a continent. Well, slightly taking away from that, I think in the last 3 weeks, we sort of have been focusing on Africa, just a fictional Africa, with the movie Black Panther coming out and sort of this whole sort of focus. But again, out of the 54 actual countries, we've chosen to sort of focus on something that is fictional. And I was just wondering how sort of that our Western focus on this fictional Africa could be used perhaps to help with the causes that our speaker is dealing with in the real world, because it seems to be sort of a easy way to sort of make ourselves feel good about being Africa-centric or something, when we've actually chosen something that's not real, when there's so much actual conflict that she deals with. So I just wanted to hear what
Alice, can you handle that one?
I haven't watched Black Panther yet. And my sister sent me a text message yesterday telling me, we are waiting for you to come home. We need to watch Black Panther. I haven't watched it yet. I've read all the reviews, which maybe will not be very good before I watch it. But of course, I am always concerned about the way Africa is featured in the news. It's always featured negatively. Very few success stories coming out of Africa.
You're one.
Yes, I know. I was about to say. I was about to say that. So then this comes as a very good surprise. And my team on the ground said, oh, finally they are saying great things. And saying great things about people who find solutions, because that focus needs to be on the focus. We keep hoping it will be on solutions. And so I haven't watched Black Panther, but I do think that Lupita Nyong'o, for example, is Kenyan. We need to find, and I know her father really well, so we need to find those actors to keep doing those kind of things. Like, for example, to act out the positive stories. Like she did another movie called The Queen of Katwe, which was really nice, of the chess, that girl who was playing chess. like those kind of positive stories. I do think some of these things will take time, but it's coming. Look at the women's movement, how far we've come, how for years and years we couldn't have sat in places like this with me talking the way I'm talking now, and with me speaking about this kind of experience, that it will come, that awareness, it doesn't matter whether it comes through a fictional, but the awareness, creating the awareness is a very important thing. So taking care of myself, I work with a very strong team. First, we keep going. One of the ways that we keep going is a humor. We find humor in everything. So we laugh a lot, and when you see us in action, when during a dialogue process, how we speak to each other. First, the team that I work with, like in Nigeria, for example, consists of people from all the ethnic communities. So when the communities are sitting, they can see themselves in the people sitting in front here. And the people sitting with me are usually people with status. They are elders, they are professors, they are lawyers, those kind of people. And we are sitting there, and we joke a lot, and it soon gets to the communities. It brings down tensions in the room when you can laugh about something. And in Nigeria, there's so much humor. You find so much humor in almost everything. In terms of personal care, because we work so closely with communities, because I spend so much time with people on the ground, I actually do not feel threatened in that sense, although they are dangerous. Things happen. We go to roadblocks, we find people have blocked the road, and they are asking questions to determine where you come from, and sometimes where you come from can just your response can be the reason why you die. So, and we, even in those places, humor, we just keep laughing, and I tell them, we have all these jokes with everybody, with policemen, with anybody we find, with all the people we speak with. So the humor helps a lot.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation of real danger?
Yes. I've been in a room where mediating, and we were talking about disarmament of the communities, and one
take away guns.
Yes, like everybody has guns, and so we were discussing. One of the communities was saying that they were forced to disarm, and the other side was not forced to disarm, and they kept arguing, and they were going back and forth, and so then I stepped in to stop the conversation, and I said, no, this needs to stop. And then this guy pulled out his gun, but not at me. He wanted to shoot the other guy, and he was like, can't keep arguing here about these kind of things, and yet what you've done to us. What would I be without my gun? And he's pointing the gun at the person. And we've been in places where there is a curfew, 24-hour curfew, and nobody should go out. And I work with a colleague, or I've always worked with a colleague from Kenya, and another woman, a young lady, and we go out to places where people ask us, people who come from that particular place ask us, but how did you get in there? We ourselves come from there, and we got in there. So we just get in. We tell people we come from Kenya, we are here to talk about peace. At roadblocks, we distribute our tea, give people tea, So really, sitting now and thinking about it, when we get back to, say, into a safe space, we sit and ask ourselves, do we risk too much? Are we, is it really too much? But then we keep reminding ourselves that the people we work with live there. They come from there. And if they don't feel that they're in danger, then we too almost feel obligated to not then feel like we're in danger. And we sit with the youths, like especially the youths. We have a program with youths right now. Youths who have been involved in violence, extreme violence, and we have all these conversations that we have with them. And I know it's dangerous, and I don't know. I don't even know how to answer this. I don't know why we are in there. I don't know.
But you're not going to stop, obviously.
Oh no, of course not. Absolutely not.
If we time for one more question now, Ian? One.
Yes,
Yeah, there's a. I haven't taken any from this side of the room. I don't think. And there's a there. Oh yes.
me? Okay. Alice, thank you very much for the fantastic work you're doing. Asante Sana. I've been to Kenya, so I have great fondness for it. I'm also originally from the Philippines, so thank you for helping there as well. My question is, what can regular people do? Regular Canadians. My friend and I the other day were talking about, we see human rights and injustices, and we post it on Facebook or we go to marches. But I was just wondering what the call to action would be for people like me.
Okay, that's a tough one, but I think first that the fact that you are here and supporting Equitas is a really good thing. I do think that there needs to be a lot of focus on women, because a lot of people, like for example, some of the programs I work in have been funded by the Canadian government. So there needs to be a lot of speaking to your policymakers, telling them that issues to do with women are very, very important, that women's inclusion in peace processes is not something that just happens for the sake of happening, that it's so important that we have women included in peace processes, and also that it helps to raise voices on this side. It helps, for example, since a document like the UN resolution 1325 was put out, it's been very useful because it opens doors. It opens conversations in terms of this is what the world is thinking, your government is signatory to this, and how can we move on? It helps a lot when we get legal recognition for especially roles women play in peace building, roles women play in human rights, get legal recognition for human rights defenders in documents that are not necessarily at the national level. They can at the international level and then coming down to the national level. It really helps to amplify the voices of people who are speaking on the ground, and we have quite a number of people speaking out there, human rights defenders who are saying this is happening to this country, this needs to move to another level. It needs to help to amplify those voices. So thank you very much.
And I can say as a member of the media that I started off at a time when there were virtually no females in media. There were a few doing specific jobs like Kate Aiken's cookbook and that kind of thing. But now, with the addition of women in our industry, it's improved it 100%. 100%. It's so much better. And it's not just about inclusiveness. It's about talent they bring. They've improved it so much. Do we have room for one more? Ian? Sorry, that's it? Okay. I was looking back here at this gentleman, but they're saying, would you, can you make it short? Sir?
Yeah, sure.
Short question? Short
Yeah, very
question,
short, very short.
answer.
Thank you,
Ian
thank
tells
you.
me we're out of time.
Yeah, thank you, Alice, for being here. I'm in Lowfield, and occasionally I'm born in Africa, like you, and occasionally I have to discuss human rights with my clients and friends. And I would like to know your approach when you have to go to places where ideas like the Me Too movement, like in Canada, we have the charter that pretty much protect everybody. And it's not the same around the world. When you have to go to places, I was reading this document, and I saw like Equitas is very active in Africa. When you have to go places like Sudan or Kenya or even South Africa, where movement like Me Too or where concept like men and women are equal, people don't necessarily understand it. I have my friends who, when I talk about this, they laugh. So what will be your approach in your role as a mediator?
Thanks. All right.
I was shocked.
Okay, thank you. You know, I've been watching the Me Too movement from afar because in the places that I work in, as you say, it's not even, it wouldn't even be an agenda. Like, it's not anything you can even begin to talk about. And I work in places where, and you know, when there's violence, violence against women multiplies when there's violence like out there. Even domestic violence increases when there's violence out there. And when we talk, I work in places where women have been raped, and they talk about being raped by so many levels, attackers, people within their community, you know, everyone. You can't even imagine the levels of the kind of things that have happened to women, and how often their bodies are used as weapons of war, as part of the war, as theaters of war. So the Me Too movement is very interesting in the sense that, so here are these women who are standing out and saying Me Too, and they are not, and they are women who we consider to be women with big names who shouldn't have gotten there, having gone through all this. And we were actually discussing with our team, how do we start a Me Too on rape when rape is something that women are even embarrassed to talk about? One of the reasons that I ended up working in Jos, I keep telling the communities there in Plateau State in Nigeria, is a meeting I attended of women, and there were about 60 of them, and some of them had babies, and I said to them, oh, so how many of you have been raped? And like almost the entire room stood up. And I said, so how many of you have children from rapes? And like again, almost the entire room stood up. And that moment made me make the decision that I was going to stay. I looked at those women and I said to myself, what is it I can do in my own little way to get this to get out there, you know? So we have all these documents, and I know I talked about 1325 earlier, you know, the document. Sometimes it's so removed from the reality on the ground. There are all these nice sounding phrases about, you know, this kind of thing. So since you're a lawyer, maybe we'll have a conversation about how to legalize Me Too, so that it becomes something that we can take to the communities, something that we probably need a protection system for women who are then able to say Me Too, to then be protected. Because in this part of the world, you can say Me Too and still go to work tomorrow without thinking about being killed, or thinking about your children being killed, or thinking about, you know, even your own family killing you for embarrassing them. So I do think that Me Too needs to become not just this movement, but to be translated into something that can be used to hold people accountable. Thank you.
And frankly, after hearing Canada's most celebrated broadcaster and someone like Ellis, who has truly inspiring life story, it's very difficult to say something consequential. So I will not try. There was a question earlier this evening. You live in Canada, you want to do something? Mm-hmm. Well, I got some ideas for you. Actually, this evening, it's our 5th or 6th year with thanks to TD that we're able to do this. It's an evening to proselytize. So become a friend to Equitas, become a donor, do something in kind, become a committee member, a board member, find a way to get involved. We're active from Vancouver to Halifax in Canada, and we're active in many places around the world. And like you, 15 years ago, we invite people from all over the world to come to Canada once a year. I really hope that that's what you'll take away from this evening, that you can do something, and that the purpose of Equitas, one of Canada's small NGO gem, is really to help people like Alice and to put people like you in touch with human rights defenders from around the world to make a difference. And I think we should be very proud that we have this small but 50-year-old Canadian institution that does this unique work. There's nothing quite like it anywhere in the world. So, in the spirit of thanking people, one last time I want to thank Valérie and TD for hosting us, and our many friends at TD, some of them who couldn't be here this evening, Huawei and our friend Rocco, Kirk from Fortigo, our friends from Telesat, and I want to acknowledge also there's another bank, the one that chooses the one with the color blue. So Louise Zambo is here this evening, as well as Adriana from BGIS, two partners that help us put together a very big conference last fall on human rights in Montreal. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for spending the evening with us. Alice and Lloyd, thank you for being so generous. I invite you for one last drink, one last bite in the room next door. Thank you, everyone.